Let's pray. Father, thank you for bringing us together today. We're grateful for this Lord's Day, this first day of the week, for a time of worship, for a time of study. Grateful that we can begin the week in this way. As we approach this extremely important text, all of them are important. This one very revealing. We pray that we may understand. We pray for the guidance of your Spirit to open our hearts. I pray for the guidance of your Spirit in teaching. We pray that this class, the thoughts, the words, all of it, will be to your glory and to the benefit of everyone here. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Yeah. It seems that every time we come to this class, every time I prepare for class, I'm thinking, wow, this is tremendously important. Well, all is important, but everything is worthy of attention and study. And I confess, as I have confessed before, that in times past I have just gone over it rather lightly. So I am grateful for the benefit of being induced by the fact that you are good students. You're interested in learning. I feel that, and that causes me to spend more time in preparation, and I'm grateful for all of that. Having said that, today we are going to see, we're in the 23rd chapter of Matthew. I don't think we'll quite get through all of it today. See how far we can go. Why is this important? Why is this chapter important? It is at this point that Jesus has had it with the religious leadership of Israel. And Jesus is pronouncing judgment on them. I see this chapter as the end of 1,500 years of failure, 1,500 years of leadership defaulting, 1,500 years of perversion, failure. These Jews, the leadership of Israel was commissioned with a sacred task, and that was to guide Israel, not only to teach them the law, but to exemplify it and to help them to follow what the law intended. They missed it all. They have messed up miserably, and this is a judgment. In other words, this is the end of the line. So it is important. What we're going to see here, we're going to see Jesus addressing three groups, I guess you would say. The first part of this chapter, 23, is addressed to the crowd and to his disciples. The second part is addressed directly to the Pharisees and the scribes. Now, of course, you could mention the Sadducees and all that, but the Sadducees, as we saw last time, they're very, very liberal. They really weren't leaders as such. But the Pharisees had taken that upon themselves, and the scribes were the most educated people in Israel. We talked about what I call the scribe school. They went to like a seminary to get their scribe tablet. So he addresses it to them directly. The last part, which I think we will not get to today, I would like to wrap this up as a unit today, but I don't think we're going to do that. The last part is addressed to Jerusalem, to the city. Okay. So let's start with the crowd. 23:1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, he wants his disciples to know this also. Verse 2, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. What's Moses' seat? Yeah. In the synagogues, the teacher, the rabbi, sat on an elevated platform, stone maybe, whatever. He sat on that cross-legged, and the crowd, the congregation, if you please, sat facing him cross-legged. That's the way they taught then. They stand up like I'm doing and sit in chairs like that. They sat on the floor cross-legged, and the teacher sat that way. Now, they called this slab, or whatever it was, in front of the synagogue, Moses' seat, because the person sitting on it was to expound, to preach on the law. That's like a pulpit, please, in church. The verb in this verse 2, they sit on Moses' seat, is a very interesting verb because it's reflexive. And it should be translated, I don't know whether you've got different versions, but it should be translated, they sat themselves on Moses' seat, which really makes a difference. It indicates they had arrogated to themselves that position. They had assumed that they were the ones to teach. Maybe they were, but it still says they set themselves on Moses' seat. And they weren't appointed for that. I get the idea, and from the fact that it was possible for anyone who came in to address the congregation. You know, that's the way Jews operated. And so I don't think that it was the plan to begin with, but by this time they just set themselves down, and they were the only ones who were going to teach. Verse 3, so practice and observe whatever they tell you, but not what they do. For they preach, but they do not practice. And you've all heard the expression, practice what you preach. Right? Practice what you preach. It comes from here. These scribes and Pharisees did not practice what they preached. They were the preachers, but their example was miserable. And Jesus said, don't follow their example. They preach, but they do not practice. Now, you don't make accusations in general terms, do you? That's not right in any context. If you're going to make an accusation, you need to present the evidence. You need to present the reasons for that accusation. He does. Verse 4. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. You've also heard the expression, he didn't lift a finger, wouldn't lift a finger. And that's where this comes from. All those expressions we have relate to the Bible. Now, tying up heavy burdens and hard to bear and laying them on people's shoulders suggests to me that they told the people to do many things that they themselves were not willing to do, and that many things that were not really a part of the law, and they made being a Jew and being religious and being a Jew who tried to do what was right, they made it very difficult for them. And I think we see that today, if I can make this application. We see that today in many legalistic churches. We see this today in cults, where people are told to do this and this and this and this, and it's miserable. It makes their lives miserable. And yet they do it because they're told if you don't do it, you go to hell. And so this is what they are doing. Jesus says they make religion onerous. They make religion a definite burden. And then they don't do it themselves. If you're going to command people to do something, you better exemplify it. Why not? Verse 5, look at the answer. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. They're not interested in doing things that would be in obedience to the law, to please God, because it's right. They do it to be seen by others. And that's why Jesus will call them every time he addresses them, as we'll see later, hypocrites. On the outside, they're one thing. On the inside, they're something else. Now, case in point, how are you going to prove that? Well, he gives them examples. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. Phylacteries were, as I understand it, little boxes that they put on their head and hands and all this, coming from the Bible. You know, these things command you, and these commandments need to be in your mind and hands and so forth. And they did it literally by these little boxes containing scripture or prayers. They would enlarge these phylacteries and make them big. So everyone would see, oh my, they are so pious. They're such good Jews. Yes,
and they still do, right?
Yeah, the Orthodox still do these things. Yes, indeed. And they make their phylacteries were part of their robe, their garments, and they have fringes on them, and they made them longer than usual. So they exaggerated all of this, so they would be praised by the people. And look at verse 6. And they loved the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues. And Jesus said, you know, when you're invited to a party, you take the lowest seat. You don't take the seat of honor. You go in and take the lowest, and then the host might move you up. But not so with these people. They took the best seats in the synagogues and in feasts. Look at us. We are so pious. We are so good. We are so faithful to God. And they love greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. In other words, when they walked in the marketplace, people are, you've seen marketplaces in that part of the world, they are crowded with people, and they walk through the marketplaces with these big phylacteries, their long fringes, and as they go through there, when somebody would say, "Good morning, Rabbi, Rabbi," oh, we love that. And Jesus said, don't be called rabbi. Now, is there something wrong with being called rabbi in and of itself? And this needs a little interpretation. Hold on as we go through the rest of it. For you have one teacher, rabbi means teacher, and you all are brothers. And I think this is the key to it right here. I'm occupying the position of teacher. When we go to worship, Pastor Jim is going to be occupying the position of a teacher, as it were. He is really going to be speaking for God, speaking for Christ, because he's expounding on the Word. And so we call him Pastor Jim, don't we? And I don't know whether you call me Teacher David or not, but the point is, there's not anything wrong with that in and of itself. What makes it wrong is what Jesus says here. You all are brothers. Anytime a title is used to set a person apart where you lose sight of the fact that we are all brothers, and where that person is exalted above everybody else, and he enjoys that, and you have a different station, a different position for him. The truth of the matter is, God set up offices in the church. You know that in Ephesians 4. That some are apostles, some prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. But this is for the edifying of the saints. This is building up the church. These are offices that people execute for the good of one another. It is not an opportunity for them to exalt themselves above others. That's the wrong of it. Now, I'm not saying we should go around all the time using those titles just to be using them, but I think that needs to be clarified. And he's calling no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who's in heaven. Now, the Protestants often throw that up to the Catholics because they use the title Father to distinguish a priest. I'm not saying that they are right in doing that necessarily, but the title Father is not in and of itself wrong. If you've ever been, and all of you have, to presbytery meetings in the Presbyterian Church, the one who is presiding will say at the beginning, fathers and brothers. What does that mean? Older, respected pastors and teachers. Even for those of us who come from Church of Christ, may I point out that in the early days, because the Church of Christ would be very much against this, but in the early days of the so-called Restoration movement, Alexander Campbell, the founder thereof, was often called Father Campbell, out of respect, not to set him apart, you see. So, I think that needs to be clarified. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who's in heaven. Neither be called instructors, you see, for you have one instructor, the Christ. And this is the crux of it right here in verse 11. We saw this before. It goes back to Matthew 18. It goes back to the time that they said, who is greatest? Who's the greater in the kingdom? And Jesus said, no one can even enter the kingdom unless he humbles himself and becomes like this little child. And he concludes it with these very words. And this needs to be taught over and over and over again. And as we've gone through this development of the kingdom and what the kingdom is, I've emphasized over and over again, the way up is down. And Jesus says it here. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. So the way to be exalted is to take the lowest seat. The way to be exalted is to be humble. The way to be exalted is to serve other people in the kingdom. That is what makes for greatness in the kingdom. But if you exalt yourself, you're going to be brought down eventually. I pause. Anybody want to say anything? I know this is a controversial passage, a difficult passage. You have every prerogative here, right, to differ with me if you wish. Okay, I guess that's satisfactory to everybody. All right, that's the first part of this 23rd chapter. Second part, longest part. He turns to the Pharisees. I expect that the Pharisees were, they always followed him around, giving him trouble, trying to trip him up with his words. So I expect they were present as he was addressing the crowds and the disciples and heard this. And they probably were getting as angry as they could be. I imagine their temper, their fury was just about to boil over. And I also expect that they probably sent people out from among their midst to say to the other Pharisees, come and listen, the teacher is denouncing us. This rabbi is speaking against us. That's just a thought. But they were there. By this time, the Pharisees are there. And so verse 13, he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Now, I confess I have always thought that Jesus really lost it at this point. How did he say it? Did he say, woe to you, Pharisees, hypocrites? Was he that angry? I think he was that angry, but the comments that I read from the commentators said he probably spoke deliberately and calmly. The anger was there, but he is speaking as a judge. And judges usually don't just lose it, It might occasionally, but he is pronouncing a verdict. And these Pharisees didn't realize it, but they're standing before God in the flesh. This is God incarnate. And God is pronouncing a verdict on them and saying they are guilty. They were given a sacred responsibility. They have defaulted. They are guilty. They are going to hell. You'll hear it. James Montgomery Boyce says there are 7 woes here that he pronounces. And they become more intense as we go through it. And again, I don't know how far we'll get today, but we'll see how far. The word woe is the opposite of the word weal. You know what weal is? Weal is good. Woe is bad. Okay. The state to the north is Kentucky. The state over to the east is Virginia. Both of those states are called commonwealths. The Commonwealth of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the idea of a commonwealth is that people have come together and formed a state for the weal of the people, for the good of the people. Those states exist under the governments that they form, for the good of the people of Kentucky and Virginia. We get our word wealth from it, wealth, you see. So, commonweal, not common woe. So woe is the opposite. And he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Boyce says, Jesus is saying, you are making it hard for others to attain salvation. Listen to this verdict. For you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. Wow. You shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves, nor allow those who would enter to go in. Isn't that awful? You don't allow, by this method of making it so unpleasant and so difficult, and also binding commandments on them that God never intended, they turn people away from the kingdom. I had a lady tell me one time, you have actually been responsible for turning a person away from the church. And I admit now she was right. I asked her to give me about whom she was speaking. But I imagine it was right, because I was a legalist. Because I made being a Christian difficult and unpleasant. I repent of that now. That'd be awful. Second law, verse 15. Boyce says this is corrupting converts. Look at verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. I was trying to speak like a judge. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. For you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. That's a convert. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Wow. A proselyte's a convert. And we know they did that. They traveled around. They followed Paul into Europe. They traveled around. They not only discouraged people from becoming Christians, but they made converts to their way of their religion, their way of interpretation of it. And you know, a new convert is always zealous. When I first became a Christian, when I first was in the Church of Christ, and then when I was first reformed, I was very, very zealous. I hope I still am. But you know, it's almost an excessive zeal for a convert. Somebody said one time, when an individual becomes a Calvinist, they should be locked up for 2 years. I understand. You learn eventually how not to offend people by preaching certain doctrines that they may be new to them, you know. So, of course, these converts are zealous. But they're zealous for the wrong thing. And he says, Jesus said, you make them twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Third law. This one is a little longer. Verse 16 to verse 22. Boyce says this is, what they were doing here is trivializing religion. Now, it takes a little digging to see what they were doing. So, see if you can follow me. I'll see if I can follow myself. It's a very difficult thing. Have you ever heard of casuistry? Casuistry. Anybody? I think that's pronouncing it right. Casuistry. C-A-S-U-I-S-T-R-Y. And if you've got your phones, you can look it up. Casuistry. It comes from the Latin word casus, which is like a case or an instance. Casuistry, I'll read you this definition. There are many definitions I encountered about this. The use of clever but unsound reasoning, especially in relation to moral questions or sophistry. They are going to use some very clever reasoning, but it is illogical. It's not reasonable. I once took a course in logic. I know that you can manipulate. If you have false premises, you can manipulate it until you come up with a false conclusion. That's casuistry. All right, let's get into this. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men. For which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? For whoever swears by the altar swears by it, and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it, and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who sits upon it. Now, you have to look deeply into this and ask questions. What were these Pharisees and scribes doing? And the commentators say they were trying to get out of their oaths. And apparently, if you look at it carefully, that's what they were doing. If you make an oath, you make a vow, you're bound to keep it. That's what the law says. I promise to do this. Then if you don't do it, it is sin. And Jews would swear by God, but then at this point in the game, they didn't want to actually use the name of God unless they use it in vain. So they swore by the next closest to God. For instance, the temple. God commanded the temple, commanded Solomon to build the temple, as he commanded the tabernacle. God is holy. Anything God touches becomes holy because of God. That's what made the temple holy, was God, the holiness of God. And gold is offered on the altar of the temple. Gold is and the gold becomes holy because of the temple. All right, God, temple, gold, holy. God most holy. Temple becomes holy because God instituted it, the touch of God. But the touch of the temple, so to speak, on the gold makes the gold holy. And on down the line. So what these people were doing is moving down the line to the gold and saying, if you swear by the gold, you can't break that oath, you're bound. Then what do? I think they swore by the temple. And then if somebody questioned them, they say, oh, I'm not bound. You're not bound to keep your oath. You know, we used to, as kids, cross our fingers behind us. And that means I don't have to keep it, it isn't true. I can get by with a lie, cross my fingers. I think that's what this is about. And there's the casuistry. We have an argument here. And the argument says the gold is more sacred than the temple. But no, Jesus says you can't do that. The temple is more sacred than the gold. And that's more important. And the same way with verse 18. The altar. God instituted the altar. This is probably the altar of sacrifice. It's nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that's on the altar, he's bound. So God, holy, altar made holy by the touch of God, and the offering on the altar is made holy by the altar, third removed from God. So you're bound if you swear by the gift on the altar, but you're not bound by the altar. Then they swear by the altar and get out. So you see the Jesus reasoning here. What is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. There is a chain that goes back to God. Everything goes back to God. And things that are holy, you start with God and you come down, but at the lowest level, it goes back to God. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. When you make an oath, regardless what you swear by, you're obligated to keep that oath. That make sense? That's kind of complicated, I know. I had to think a lot. This is because I never really understood that. I kept going back and reading it until I thought I did. But that's casuistry. A very clever bit of reasoning that leads in the wrong direction. But they didn't deceive Jesus. All right, verse 23. I want to read this comment before I leave that topic. They were taking the binding power out of oaths. Linsky said, "It is ridiculous to try to disassociate any sacred object from the God who lends it its sacredness, or by mere indirectness to escape contact with God." Now, this next point, Boyce says, is neglecting what is actually important. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Tithing is a commandment. So these Pharisees would take these little seeds from these herbs and they would count out 10% and give that to God. Of seeds, of tiny seeds. Very meticulous. And I understand they literally took something that was like a net, a small thing that you strain with a strainer, very tiny. And they would pour their water or wine through that strainer because some insect they had dropped into their water or wine, and the insect was unclean, and if they consumed that insect, they would be made unclean. Well, it can't be unclean. So they would strain out the insects. I don't know what's swallowing a camel. I think Jesus is just having a little fun with them there. You don't really swallow a camel. But the point is, they miss the point. The point is they don't distinguish what is weighty when it comes to weightier things. And we should know what the weightier things are. Justice and mercy and faithfulness. It is true that we are kind of commanded to tithe. They were commanded to tithe. But more important is justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Micah chapter 6. How shall I come before my God? Shall I come with calves or with thousands of rams? Shall I come with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I offer the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? God says, He has showed you, O man, what is important: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. We ought to be able to make those distinctions. Common sense tells us we should do that. And I am realizing that this is probably as far as I'm going to go today. We'll have to finish that next time. I'll make a little note. Any comment?
I'm guessing he doesn't show any condemnation towards the Sadducees because the scribes and the Pharisees are the ones that should just know better. The Sadducees are just so far out.
They're so far out, yes. These people should know better, Jerry. That's right. They had the responsibility. And, you know, there's something James says, don't be many teachers. And he means exactly what he says. The responsibility of being a pastor, being a preacher, being a teacher, being an elder, whatever, that is a great responsibility. It is not to be taken away and abused. Anything else? Let's pray. Thank you for your word, Father. Thank you for this text as our Lord condemns the Pharisees and scribes. May we discern from this what is important and right in your sight, as your Son taught here. Bless us now as we enter into worship, and we worship in spirit and in truth. We pray in Christ's name.